She is committed to teaching and training, and she has been the coordinator of the TSU PhD Counseling Psychology program since 2014. Dr. Oatis-Ballew earned her BA from Fisk University here in Nashville, and her master's and PhD degrees from Howard University. Both of those institutions emphasize multicultural issues and social justice for all groups. Professionally, Dr. Oatis-Ballew has worked with persons of myriad and diverse backgrounds in a variety of applied settings and in a variety of capabilities. She has served as a clinician in a community mental health center that operated in an economically marginalized and ethnically diverse neighborhood, and that also served people of diverse religious backgrounds and sexual orientations. Robin has maintained a private practice for over 18 years, and I guess in Nashville for 14 years. So without anything else, welcome, Robin. Really happy to have you here.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you for the support. Thank you, everyone, for the waving hands. And thank you, Kathy and Melissa, for the support that you've offered before I did this talk today. And want to acknowledge just that want to let everyone know that Kathy emailed me last week to just kind of acknowledge that, hey, this is when I agreed to do this topic a year and a half ago, the zeitgeist isn't what it is. It was not then what it is now. And so it's, you know, I feel mentally prepared, but had asked me today would I do this talk. I don't know. I don't know. So, but just appreciate your reaching out, and that is, I think that's an important aspect of being an ally for any community, is just offering support. So, and I'm also excited to say that I just see a few friendly names and friendly faces. So, Linda Manning, we have never met, but if you're the Linda Manning from that I think you are, you've trained a number of TSU students, so thank you. And I see a TSU alum here as well, Erin. I don't know where oh, there she is. So it's good to see some friendly names and friendly faces.
So happy to have you.
Thank you, thank you. I have been looking forward to this, despite kind of all of the, you know, zeitgeist things that Kathy alluded to in her email. So I do want to, I didn't ask, is it okay if I share my screen for the slides and everything? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, go through some slides. I always like to know at the start of a presentation, how many slides will I be pummeled with? So there will be 18 slides, but I think a few are hidden. So just we'll give you the advertising there. You know, I don't, Melissa, I don't think I can share my, oh yeah, I can, I see it here. All right. Okay. All right, here we go. So also at the start of a presentation, I like to know what to expect. So here's the outline for today. So we'll do an opening activity, and I'll explain the activity, give it context. There will be a definition of microaggressions, followed by a definition of microinterventions. Two areas to consider there's two areas that my presentation is really looking at. So I'll just kind of set the frame in that way. Also, we'll talk about Get Out and microaggressions. Has any, just by like kind of a show of hands, and I'll scroll through the faces that I can see, has anyone seen the movie Get Out or is familiar with the premise for Get Out? Okay, keep your hands up. Okay, a number of you. Okay, about half. So I'm going to take us through a snippet, a YouTube video about Get Out and microaggressions. So if you have not seen the movie, it is full of spoilers. It does not spoil the movie for you, but just I want to put that alert out there. And then I'll also talk about a Sue article from 2019 that talks about microinterventions. And he and his team really focus on how to respond to microaggressions by using microinterventions. So we'll go through that. And then I'll just talk about my own anecdotes for a bit. And then we'll talk about resources, and time permitting, we will go through the Brene Brown empathy video. Also, by show of hands, how many people have seen that video? And please keep them up for me. Okay. Oh, so less people have seen that video than Get Out. Okay, so that's good. So, and I think for those of you who have seen it a dozen times, like me, we could always see it one more. So that's kind of what we will go through today. So the opening activity that I want to start with is showing you this table, and it's an identity table. And so this is an experiential exercise. If we were together, I would post all of these labels around a room and ask you to stand under different labels as I called out some sentences and some triggers to let you know where you should go next. But now what I'd like to ask you to do is just on your notes pages, on your phone, or with pen and pencil, just write down the groups that you would gravitate towards in response to my questions. And then I'll kind of frame this activity afterwards for a bit. So I think everyone has their phones or paper and pencil. So I'm going to read a list of statements. I want you to complete the statement by choosing, and if we were together, standing under one of the labels on the wall. So I will say, I want you to complete the statement by choosing a label and writing it down on your paper. This is a silent exercise. Listen to the statements as I read them aloud and write down the label which indicates your response. Respond to the statements as you understand them. I want you to participate on it.
Robin, I'm so sorry.
Sure.
We have someone waiting in the waiting room and I can't let them in because you're the host.
Oh, no problem.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, so do I need to make you the host? Or do I just hit it?
If you look up at the top of the chat box where it says participants, it should be, Rebecca should be waiting to let in. Can you hover over that and just say, here?
It is not at the top of my chat box, but you know what? Let me go back to sharing screen because I think I did see something.
Yeah.
And I just was like, I don't know what that's for, so.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, I see 5 people, so.
Let them all in.
Let them all in? Okay, I will do that.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No problem, not a problem. We are all rolling with 2020. Oh, and one is Rebecca Seelove, who's also at TSU.
She's the one that messaged me that she couldn't.
Ah, okay.
All right,
got it. Is everyone in? Okay, so okay to keep going, Melissa? Okay. Now something really weird has happened where I can, oh, you were muted. I was thinking I can no longer hear you. So for those of you who just entered, we're doing a silent exercise where you were looking at the labels, and I'll just quickly read the instructions again. So I'm going to read a list of statements. I want you to complete the statement by choosing and writing down one of the labels presented here. This is a silent exercise. Listen to the statements as I read them aloud and write down which label indicates your response. Respond to the statements as you understand them. I want you to participate honestly and free of peer pressure or the need to be accepted or censoring yourself. And just, again, focus on your own personal beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. So here are the statements. Number 1, I think about this aspect of my identity the most. I think about this aspect of my identity the most. Number 2, I think about this aspect of my identity the least. I think about this aspect of my identity the least. Number 3, this part of my identity has the most effect on how people treat me. This part of my identity has the most effect on how people treat me. Number 4, this was emphasized most in my family. This was emphasized most in my family. Number 5, this was emphasized least in my family. This was emphasized least in my family. Number 6, I feel the most discomfort about this part of my identity. I feel the most discomfort about this part of my identity. Number 7, the most painful lesson I learned was the result of this. The most painful lesson I learned was the result of this. Number 8, the most rewarding experience I've had was the result of this. The most rewarding experience I've had was the result of this. And so we don't need to share what you put down in different categories, but I think this is a great self-reflective exercise because it lets us know where we put our attention and where our potential blind spots are. You know, when we're driving down the freeway or down a street, we want to cross over into another lane. We may not see another car or vehicle there, and it's just out of our awareness. And so there are some areas where we are hyper aware. There are some areas where we are just not. And so I think when we understand what parts of our identity we think about the least, what we think about the most, what was emphasized the most in our families, what was emphasized the least in our families, we get a sense of where we put our attention. And I think that for the areas that we think about the least or that were emphasized the least in our families, those potentially are the areas where we are most likely to step in it. Those are the areas where we are most likely to step in it and to make microaggressions. And it may not be our intent, but again, we know that there's a difference between intent and impact. And so again, we won't talk about it and process it, but I encourage you to just think about, you know, what was emphasized? What do I think about the least? What do I think about the most? And it may help give some clarity on areas for further attention. And I think when we think about individual and cultural differences, it's important to know what we don't know. You know, we would all like to know it all, but it's just as important to know what we don't know and to be sensitive to that. All right, so next. Okay, so microaggressions. And I'm taking this definition from Counseling the Culturally Diverse by Sue and Sue, 5th edition. So microaggressions are the everyday actions or comments that are subtle insults, invalidations, or offensive behaviors that marginalized people face. Based on this definition, everyone will commit microaggressions in the course of their life. Whether microaggressions are committed with malice or unconsciously, their impact can be harmful. And one of the things I like about this definition is that it says, based on this definition, everyone will commit microaggressions in the course of their life. And we, I think, spend a fair amount of time not wanting to step in it, but we're going to step in it. And I have a colleague who's at the University of Florida, Roberto Abreu, and the way that he describes it, I think is so helpful. He describes microaggressions as being in a dog park. If you're in a dog park, you are going to step in poop. It's inevitable. You're in a dog park, you're going to step in it. And what he says is that it's not that you stepped in it, that's the issue. It's what you do after you step in it. That's the real issue. I mean, you know, everyone would like to avoid it, but okay, you've stepped in it, it's smeared on your shoe, you're tracking it everywhere. What do you do? And so it's how you rebound and recover and repair. So you clean it off of your shoe. You try not to track it all over the place. You know, you do what you can. But what's going to happen? Can you avoid the dog park? Probably not. So you're going to go back to the dog park. You're going to be mindful of the area where you stepped before, but guess what? You're still in a dog park. So you're going to step in it. So I like that because what he suggests is just that it's, you know, do be mindful and not deliberately do things. But when you do it, when we make a microaggression, there can be a tendency to feel such intense embarrassment and shame that we make it about ourselves and what we're feeling rather than the target that was hurt. I think also there can be a sense of I just want to ignore this and have it go away, which then adds to the sense of invalidation, not just for the target, but for anyone else who was a bystander as well. And so it's just this recognition that we're going to step in it. What do we do? How do we rebound and recover? So for today, what I'm really looking at is 2 ways to consider the area of microaggressions. One is from the practitioner's perspective and one is from the client's perspective. So from the practitioner's perspective, I think we have to be aware. We have to be aware of where are we most likely to put our attention when it comes to individual and cultural differences? Where are we least likely to put our attention? Where are we most sensitive? Where are we less sensitive? What are our own biases, values, assumptions? And then I think we also need to educate ourselves cognitively and effectively. I think our heads get things all of the time, and our hearts sometimes are just slow to catch up when it comes to this area in particular. And people notice that, like when we are interacting with someone who has a history of feeling marginalized, and we're just like getting it cognitively, but not really experientially, that comes across. So I think we have to challenge ourselves to do both. I also think that just as we can commit microaggressions, we can also be the victims of microaggressions. And so we need to practice good self-care for ourselves when we commit and when we experience, so that we have this reserve where we can help ourselves rebound and recover. From the client's perspective, I think that as clinicians, we're also trying to promote self-awareness for clients. That's what we do. We help clients just become more aware. And so sometimes we may have to help a client understand, maybe this was a microaggression. We may have to talk to a client about, potentially seeking out support for this, or advocating for themselves, or joining advocacy groups, or just knowing who their allies are as needed or as appropriate. And I think this is important because sometimes people may feel as if their distress is from within themselves, as opposed to contextual and sociocultural forces that are like pressing on them. And so if we can help disentangle that some, so that people aren't internalizing and owning something that is not theirs to internalize and own, I think that can be really helpful as well. So Get Out. So next I want to show a video about Get Out and microaggression. So that we kind of just understand it better. I think it's always helpful when we have concrete examples of what microaggressions are and what they look like and how they operate. And this movie gives us many of them. So I'm going to stop my share, toggle out to my YouTube screen, and show you all this video. And please let me know if you can hear it when I get there as well. Oh, here, great. I can share computer sound. Oh, whoops. Sorry, not there yet. That was actually my slide and not the video. Oh, this is one of those things where I'm like, did I pull this up? Yes, I did, but I put it in my emails. Hopefully you're not looking at all my emails. So here we go. All right. So again, this film does contain spoilers. And give me another minute to make sure that I'm sharing my sound. Right, I'm gonna hit play. Can you all hear it? Melissa and Kathy, I can see your faces.
At the
Can you
risk
hear
of
it?
turning the
Okay.
comment section into a shit show, I'm going to get a little political here because, well, this film is explicitly political. And if you can't handle that, well...
Get out. Sorry, man. Okay. Get out!
Now, for those of you still watching, today we're going to be talking about a social phenomenon known as a microaggression. A microaggression is an indirect, subtle, or even unintentional expression of discrimination towards a marginalized group. And they are extremely difficult to explain to people who've never experienced them. They tend to be innocuous, exceedingly minor moments that nonetheless display ignorance or bias in a way that just makes you feel small, alienated. Something like this.
So how long has this been going on, this thing? How long?
Or this.
With your frame and your genetic makeup, if you really pushed your body, and I mean really trained, no pussyfooting around, you'd be a fucking beast.
Invariably, describing these incidents to people is like playing Russian roulette, where the bullet is some variation of the phrase, Just get over it. It's not a big deal.
Everything's a microaggression. This makes me want to vomit. I mean, like, liberals don't think we should be allowed to say anything because everything can be a microaggression. They need to crawl back into their safe space, put on All Things Considered, and get the heck out of everyone else's business.
Get Out's massive success was a hugely important moment for me. Not just because of its excellence as a genre exercise, nor its nuanced and oh-so-real depiction of racism in contemporary America. No, the thing that really stood out to me was how it deals with microaggressions, specifically how Chris deals with them. First, there's the immediate reaction.
Black is in fashion.
You can see him holding back that initial rush of anger, then struggling to find an appropriate response. And then, finally, the response he chooses.
Pardon me, I'm gonna take some pictures.
Sure.
Which is almost always awkward because, well, what the hell can you say? Chris is acutely aware of how ridiculous he sounds to people who just don't get it. Trying to explain to his white girlfriend why finding his phone unplugged feels threatening is a lot like trying to explain why this feels threatening.
How you doing today? That's not good.
Wow.
In a situation like this, it's almost always easier to just bite your tongue and let it go than it is to open your mouth and be confronted with this.
Say it out loud and hear how ridiculous you sound. I'm upset the mascot wears a cowboy hat and has a mustache because it may or may not be reminiscent of a Confederate soldier. Sounds like history to me, but oh, I forgot, you'd rather study feelings than bother with reality.
Thus, Chris is the one who ends up having to apologize and reconcile over and over again.
Cool. It's all good. Don't talk to your dad. It's fine. It's fine. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Forget about it. Oh, no, it's cool. I was just confused. Forget it. Never mind.
No. Stop. Don't do that. Don't.
Okay. I'm sorry. It's all good, right?
So you're comfortable enough, right?
It's perfect. Thanks.
But no matter how many times he demurs to the feelings of others, it just keeps happening.
Do you find that being African American has more advantage or disadvantage in the modern world?
And it happens a lot. The effects are cumulative. If they weren't such a regular occurrence, nobody would care. As real as this portrayal is, the film's true stroke of genius is that it depicts this within a horror movie. Because of the genre, everybody watching the film is expecting something awful to happen. Every single moment holds the potential for life-threatening danger. Despite the numerous false alarms, we all know that at some point, the axe will fall. We don't know when or how often, but it's as certain as death. The audience, in other words, regardless of their identity, experiences the same guarded tension marginalized people feel every day. Those of us who are the target of racism move through the world knowing that at some point, someone who looks like this is going to say something like this.
I do know Tiger.
Oh, that's great.
Super.
Gordon loves Tiger.
It won't be everybody, of course, and it might not happen today, but it will happen. So best be on your guard, because you never know when this...
By the way, I would have voted for Obama for a third term if I could. Best president in my lifetime, hands down.
...will lead to this. And then there's the betrayal we've experienced throughout the ages, where people who purport to be our allies suddenly take aggressive action against us.
Where are those keys, Rose?
You know I can't give you the keys, right, babe?
I don't think anyone will disagree that suspicion and a heightened state of alertness are absolutely essential to surviving a horror movie. But because the lives of minorities like myself exist in the real world and not a medium full of tropes, these states of mind become, in the eyes of many, totally unwarranted. But maybe a film like this, couched in the entertaining and familiar, can help others understand how and why it is we see the world the way we do. Maybe instead of laughing off our concerns, People can be just a little bit more like Rod.
Bro, how you not scared of this, man?
Sorry.
That Patreon account
All
very
right.
soon, so stay tuned.
Let me get out of this. Let me pause share. I've got to move you guys around a bit so I can get to my screen here and get rid of it. All right, there we go. Okay, so I want to pause and just, since we've kind of covered a lot so far, give people a chance to put their names in the chat if they want to have a reaction to the video or to the exercise. And while people decide if they want to do that, I'll just say, I got this video from a student who presented in class on microaggressions, and I thought this really captures it. And it's focused on racial microaggressions, but I think we could apply it to microaggressions that happen to other groups, LGBTQIA, immigrants, I think, women, I think there are many, I think it just translates across different categories and how, it's just, what do I do with this? And I really like how he explains, maybe the horrifying part of Get Out is not that it's a horror movie, but it's the things that Chris has to endure day in, day out, and that he has to grapple with. And it makes us curious about the distress that can cause and just kind of the situations, the impact of those situations on a person. So next, I'm going to go back to my slide. Oh, there is one chat. Yes, definitely. Thank you, Rebecca, for that comment. And it's good to see you, Rebecca. All right, so I'm going to share screen again and get back to the slides. One moment. Okay. So next, so let's talk about recognizing microaggressions. So typically microaggressions are directed at a marginalized group. And so think protected categories. I've had people ask, can this be related to weight? And we all know that jokes are made about people's weight, size, appearance, things like that. Microaggressions don't count towards weight and things like that. Think about, and there's a difference. There's a distinction between a microaggression and insensitivity. So a microaggression is not exactly the same as an insensitivity. People can be insensitive to all sorts of ways. To all sorts of groups. But I was at APA 2019 in a workshop that Sue did with his research team for the article that he published in the American Psychologist in 2019 about microaggressions and microinterventions. And one of the points that he made is that when people are in a group that is marginalized, it's not typically by choice, it's part of like who they are. And it's something that they think about constantly, that you think about it in the morning when you wake up, like, okay, this is who I am, fill in the blank. What might happen today? That there's this hyper awareness of like, okay, what am I going to encounter? And so not every group experiences, and not every person within these groups experiences that, but it's typically something that just is deeply impactful, or it really impacts an entire family for generations and generations. And so it's really quite different. So I think protected category is one way to understand that. So also in any type of microaggression, there are typically three roles. There's the perpetrator, or the person who steps in it, and then there's the target, the person who it's directed at, and then there's a bystander. And one of the things that I like about the Sue article that I'm referencing a lot throughout this hour together is that he and his team do not put the qualifier like innocent bystander on it. It's just a bystander. And how that person chooses to engage or not engage, we're not going to add a quality to it. It's just that person is a bystander. So in terms of recognizing microaggressions, typically directed at a marginalized group, there are three roles: perpetrator, target, and bystander, or minimally perpetrator and target. And then how do you know it's happened? So there's a couple ways where you know it's happened. You kind of recognize it yourself as a microaggression. But another thing that happens is that targets and allies kind of catch one another's eye, like, wait, did that just happen? Like, am I overreacting? Did anyone else hear what I thought I just heard? There's this sense of like, let me check this out with someone else in the room. So that tends to happen. And there's also like we're clinicians, there's like a tone change in the room where there's like a kind of what just happened there. So if you're like, sure, not sure, kind of look around and get a sense of, is anyone else responding? I'm uncomfortable. Are others uncomfortable? And then you get an inkling that, oh, there may be a microaggression happening here. And so micro-interventions. So this article really focused on micro-interventions. And just by show of hands, how many people have heard this phrase before and are familiar with this definition, micro-intervention? I'm going to scroll through. Okay, so some of you, but it seems like it's new for most. So micro-interventions. Micro-interventions are the everyday words or deeds, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicates to targets of microaggressions. A, validation of their experiential reality. B, value as a person. C, affirmation of their racial or group identity. D, support and encouragement. And E, reassurance that they are not alone. So microaggression happens, and then that's countered by a micro-intervention that says, that's not just in your head. You didn't make that up. That's not okay. You matter to me. Your experience matters. I'm going to support you in this. You're not alone. That's the impact, and those are the goals of micro-intervention. And so there's a few areas that micro-interventions hit, and this is all taken from the article that's noted at the bottom. So they make the invisible visible. They disarm the microaggression. They educate the perpetrator, and they seek external reinforcement or support. So what does this kind of look like? So let's imagine a micro-intervention. Actually, at a different talk that I went to at APA, another author on this study was talking about an experience she had in high school where she was in a chemistry class, and she's Muslim American, and she was wearing hijab. She had a head covering and a full dress, that was rather, shapeless. And, she's in chemistry class. I think they're talking about explosives or something. And someone in her class said, oh, we shouldn't be showing Miriam how to make bombs. And she was like, it was like a gut punch, just like, oh, what do I do with that? And no one responded. No one knew what to do with that. A micro-intervention would look like someone saying, oh, why do you say that? Like just a question, like, oh, it's kind of a challenge. Oh, why do you say that? So you've made the invisible visible. You're trying to disarm it. You're educating the perpetrator, like, something is amiss here that may not be okay. It also invites other people to then kind of wonder, oh yeah, why did you say that? Other people who may be uncomfortable or who may have noticed it. And it gives some support to that person so they don't feel as alone. And one of the things that this article says you can also do as a micro-intervention is just say something like, ouch, like, ouch. And then that's like, oh, wait, did I just step in it? What did I do? What just happened? And I think in this way, we bring attention to it. And the first step of the micro-intervention is to make the invisible visible, to make the invisible visible. I remember years ago, when I lived in Chicago, I had a roommate who'd gone out with some friends, and it was group of men and women, and there was one male in the group who, and just different racial and ethnic backgrounds, and there was one male in the group who persisted in saying just sexist things, just comments and stereotypes about women. And then there was another man in the group who just at some point said, you say some inappropriate things. Everyone paused. The person who was the perpetrator kind of paused. And then everyone went on. It doesn't, so when you're doing a micro-intervention, it can be this kind of questioning thing like, oh, why do you say that? To kind of put the person on awareness, like what's happening. It can be a statement that's like, hey, this is not okay. It doesn't need to be like a speech. It doesn't need to overtake the communication. That may be appropriate, that may not be appropriate. It just depends on the demands of the situation, but there are many different ways to respond. In this article, there's another example that's given where there's, I think, an Asian child in a class, and the teacher says, oh, you really speak excellent English. And the response is, thank you, I hope so. Like, I'm from Oregon, or just, something like that, where, it's just, and then let's move on. And then let's just let's again, make the invisible visible, disarm the microaggression. And with educating the perpetrator, that part is kind of helping point out that there's a discrepancy between maybe what the person intended and the impact. And we know that there's a difference between intent and impact. We all have honorable intentions, yet the impact, doesn't quite feel so honorable lots of times. So educating the perpetrator can be really helpful. And then again, seeking external reinforcement or support is part of it. And this may be something that we as clinicians encourage clients to do, to seek out, appropriate support groups, to find, their allies, to go to counseling in a safe space. All of those, to seek out groups that may be supportive. So if you're working with a client who's migrating to this country, you might, at least in Tennessee, you might encourage them to seek out TIRC, which is the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition. If you have a client who's, an international student on campus, you might encourage them to seek out, the Office of International Students for available resources. But different groups have different resources in place. And so you may just need to, and most people within the group are aware of this, but you still may need to help advocate for your clients and help them advocate for themselves. So just my own anecdotes here. So, from, I guess, 19 years in practice and teaching, there are a few things that I try to do to communicate that I try to be a safe space, and I step in it, and I try to know what I don't know. And so in that way, I try to create the frame for microaggressions to be addressed within counseling and within the program, and create some vehicle for that. So this is just some of the things that I try to do with students and or clients. One of those is attend to individual and cultural differences. I try to communicate a respect for that. I disclose my identities. I don't, ask people directly to disclose theirs, invite them to as they feel comfortable. I also, if that is shared, I try to put that in the context of things. So if someone is Persian and it's March 20th or so, which is Nowruz, I might ask about what customs they have, or, say, oh, so have you put your Hafseen table together? Which is kind of like asking a person, oh, have you gotten up your Christmas decorations? And I will say that I'm a member of the Baha'i faith community, and all of the time, every year around December, people are like, oh, have you done your Christmas shopping? I'm not offended by that. I get that I live in the US and it's Christian dominated, but I also try to be mindful of what happens in other people's traditions as well. And I don't typically do Christmas shopping, but then I ask that person about their Christmas list. I also, with clients and students, try to be clear about what I do and don't know. There's a typo there that I didn't catch, but I try to be clear that I've got some spots that are just outside of my awareness, or some spots that I know I'm not too strong on that. And so I portray myself as a lifelong learner, and that I'm always trying to educate myself. And I do not make clients responsible for my education. So if they're from a group that I'm not familiar with, that's very outside of my own group identities, I don't ask them, well, tell me about your group identities. I try to learn what I can. And then if I need to kind of give that back to them, I say, I could be off, but my understanding is this. If there is something that I'm curious about, let's say a client is like very energetic or enthusiastic in their speech, and that others might perceive that as confrontational. I might ask, within, let's say this person is Greek. I don't know, within Greek culture, I'm not familiar with it. Is that typical for communication? I may ask for clarification, like within your own context, how is this received? I also acknowledge when I've learned something from a client or from a student, and I think that keeps me in the phase of being a lifelong learner. And it just kind of says, like, there's a safe space here. We don't have to know it all. And I can tell you, last week I was teaching multicultural counseling, and a student said, oh, this is like the Mixed Heritage Bill of Rights that's on APA's website. And I was like, I never heard about a Mixed Heritage Bill of Rights. And, another student provided a link, and I went to it and I checked it out and I loved it, and I will incorporate it in the future. But I was clear to say, like, this is learning for me as well. And I do note that I'm a learner in this area and I absolutely make mistakes. Also, when it comes to clients, I try to balance invisibility versus hypervisibility. So, you know, people want to be seen, but they don't want like all of their identities to be overemphasized, and that's the only thing we talk about. So I try to have some balance. Things that I'm sure we all know, try to manage and consider egalitarian relationships. As I said earlier, consider the sociocultural forces and the impact they have on distress, and also consider culture and context and its impact on distress. Some other things that I've just learned over the years of teaching and doing therapy is that as an African-American woman, those are the identities people see immediately when they check out my website or they see me in a classroom, that people have certain expectations of me. And I try to give myself grace on this, but people have an expectation that I'm going to be very understanding, that I'm going to know everything about individual and cultural differences or enough to support them, that I am able and equipped to offer a soft space to land. And that those are two things that people just kind of expect. Some things because I'm a woman, some things because I'm African-American, like there's this expectation that she's going to be nurturing and she's going to be gentle and she's going to be soft and she's going to take care of me. Sometimes it plays out that way, sometimes it doesn't. When it doesn't, there's like shock and awe and disappointment on all sides. And I try to recognize when a person has expectations of me that they may not have of someone else, simply because of my demographics, not because of who I am or how I practice, but because of my demographics. And I think we all have to be aware of how people may perceive us versus who we actually are, and have some like truth in advertising and transparency about how we practice and how our identities may or may not lend themselves to what they expected. Also in practice, I have been the target of microaggressions related to race and religion. I've certainly had clients who've told me things like they don't like certain types of Black people, or clients who've gotten in trouble at work for racist comments, or clients who've said, "What church do you go to?" And if they didn't like my answer, which is, I believe in God, or I do say I believe in God, and I say I believe in everyone's, I believe that religions are like all very similar in wanting people to live their lives a certain way and be very spiritually focused. But if I don't say I go to Temple Baptist, then some people are like, yeah, I can't. And they don't come back and they don't schedule. And that's okay. People get to, well, that's not necessarily a microaggression. People have their preferences about what they're looking for. And if a Christian counselor is what they're looking for, then that is, if that's their safe place, they get to pursue that. So other things to keep in mind as we wrap up are resources. So resources for practitioners, CEUs and workshops are great. Tennessee Psychological Association has workshops on this, as does APA. I've been out of school for 20 years. I went to a program that emphasized individual and cultural differences, but that was I started grad school in the 90s. In 1995, that was not a time when psychology was considering individual and cultural differences very deeply at all. I'm mid-career, so I think for those of us who are mid or later career, this typically is not training that we had. This typically was not emphasized in our programs. And then if we go out and we just kind of practice with our shingles, and our licensing boards don't require, workshops around individual and cultural differences, we can hit a real stuck point. And so it's important that we educate ourselves through the vehicles we have available. Psychotherapy.net definitely has resources in this area and workshops by people who do research in this area and who, write the articles, develop the trainings. Also, we are our own best instrument. So we should listen to others, and we should, what feedback are others giving us about where we stand with individual and cultural differences, and challenge our comfort zones, challenge our comfort zones. I like to be comfortable. I love to be comfortable. And I don't like committing microaggressions, but I do challenge myself to try to figure out and learn what I don't know. And we do not have to know it all. I think a great ingredient is empathy, that if we have empathy for our clients and we're willing to just get in the trenches with them, we can figure it out together. And it's important that we have a soft space that we offer support, but that we also have a soft space to land for ourselves as well, and that we give ourselves some grace. When it comes to clients, oftentimes clients have their own resources, as I mentioned earlier, but you can refer people to in-group mentors, advocates, leaders, peers for support. But oftentimes clients have their own resources. If you have a client who is an immigrant or an international student, they likely know what the resources are because other people in their communities have shared that with them. But for your own communities, wherever you practice or who you practice with, I encourage you to think about, hey, if this is what my client load looks like, and my client may not know about these resources, then what can you find out? Also, if your client tells you that they are, participating in this group or that group, then that may be a resource for another client as well. And so I think we have just enough time to show the empathy video for those of us who like to watch it over and over and over again, and those of us who haven't seen it. So, one moment. So this is the Brene Brown empathy video, and I think again, whoops, this is just my slides. So I think again, we don't have to know it all. We do have to be willing to try. And we have to be aware of what we don't know. And empathy can carry us a long way. If we're just willing to say, I'm sorry that happened to you. I don't understand everything related to this area, or I may not have experienced this, but I'm sorry that you experienced it, and you can tell me about it, and we can figure it out together. We can try to figure it out together. Empathy just goes such a long way. Oh my gosh, I keep choosing my same slides. I swear this time I'm going to choose the video. Oh no. Okay, my screen is freezing, but here we go. All right, third time is the charm. And let me know by hands up in just a moment. Great, I'm still sharing my computer sound. Just confirm that you can hear it.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
You're muted, Robin.
Great. I've got people in my house, so I try to mute whenever I can. But I really like that video because we don't have to have been this student, Miriam, in chemistry class where someone said that to us too. Or we don't need to be a transgender person who, people are like, oh, you can't go to my bathroom. We don't have to have experienced that to be able to identify with that person. But most of us have experienced times where we felt less than, or like we were on the outside wanting, looking in and wanting to be a part of something, or that we were just pointed out for being different. And so I think when we can engage in that part and exercise our empathy towards others, that's really, really helpful. We do not have to know it all. We do need to be empathetic. So that is it. That's all I got. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin.
Yes, you're most welcome. So questions?
So I think some people are just raising their hands.
Oh, okay. I was looking in the chat.
I think you can click a raised hand at the bottom of your thing if you want to put your name in the chat.
You can, and you can change it so that you don't look like Homer Simpson, in terms of skin color. So you can also make it balanced. But go ahead, Rebecca Seelove.
Thank you very much, Robin. A delight to see you and to hear you. The question that came up for me kind of early on is one that I reflect back on situations where I would say I was a bystander. And I struggled. I'm remembering one particularly painful time. I was at a restaurant with an African-American friend, and the young man who was serving us launched into this speech to her about all the ways he was learning about African Americans. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, she was patient with him and very, it was just very, I would say, curt at the same time that she was patient. She didn't try to draw him out. And after she and I talked about it, but I felt like maybe I should have said something, but I didn't know what to say. And I know at the time I didn't want to look like I thought she needed help to take care of her. So what
and I think so well, let me say, I think that's what's hard about being the target or the bystander. It's like this deer in the headlights, like, what do I do? How do I navigate this? And I think if we go back to the first step in micro interventions, it's to make the invisible visible. And so and I can tell you that something similar happened to my husband and I. We were out to eat. My husband's African-American. And there was, we had a waiter who was very friendly and very engaging, but clearly wanted us to know that he was kind of aware. And he said, and then maybe after you eat this, you'll have the itis, which for those of, I'm not going to explain what itis is for those of you who don't know, but for those of you who do, it's like, oh, we were aghast. And so, so we just pulled, when he came back, we said, you seem really friendly and really engaging, but we want to let you know that this is how we heard, that this is what this really stands for. This is what this really means. And it's wonderful that you're like stepping outside of your comfort zone, but this could also be perceived in this way, that kind of when you are trying too hard, it turns people off. So that's how we handled it. If you wanted to just kind of say, oh, I really see that, you're really trying in this area, but, I think we just want to enjoy our lunch for now. It may give the impression of like, okay, this is not, and our lunch is not an opportunity for you to display what you know and your awareness. And I don't think it has to be too deep, but I do think it is that deer in the headlights moment, and it's hard to know how to handle it. And I also hear the other thing is, this person is capable. And so like, would it have been inappropriate to kind of say something because would you give the impression that you were stepping on her toes? And I don't think that's the way this works. Because people typically who are marginalized and experience a lot of microaggressions are just so exhausted, just so exhausted that to have someone come and kind of step in, I think is wonderful. And that's one of the things I mentioned Kathy I acknowledged at the start that Kathy did this, that she sent me an email that was like, hey, I get that this topic is just, it means something different than when you agreed to do it a year and a half ago, and that you may be exhausted. What can I do to support? So it's also just asking, saying to your friend, I see this, I'm happy to say something, what can I do to support you? I don't want to step on your toes. So you could check it out with her first as well. Yeah. Other questions?